I still remember 9/11 very clearly. I was Buddhist. I wasn't even Muslim at the time. The events of September 11th hit me differently, and there was good reason. As a Japanese American, I grew up with a different type of sacred history, and this has informed my opinion and shaped my character almost as much as anything else in my life. Every time I start to see the rise of fear in politics, I always find myself reflecting on this sacred history that I'm going to share with you guys today.
Assalamualaikum. So I'm editing the video right now, and I just wanted to warn everyone that this is definitely a history lesson. It's a history lesson, but it's a history that I don't think most Muslims would normally get the chance to learn about or be exposed to. And it's just a really important history that's relevant to a lot of things going off in the world right now. And I hope you watch to the end. And that's it. Please enjoy.
So, the story of this sacred chronicle goes something like this. It started on a regular morning that was just like any other morning. And then suddenly, America was under attack. In just a few short hours, thousands of Americans were dead, and the entire country was up in arms, ready to go to war against an entire people. And from the next day, at schools across the nation, anyone that looked like the enemy became the target for racial discrimination. People were afraid that America had been infiltrated by terrorists, and anyone that looked like the enemy was a viable target for revenge.
Wait. Sorry, guys. I had the wrong pictures. Let's take it back one more time.
It started on a regular morning that was just like any other morning. And then suddenly, America was under attack. In just a few short hours, thousands of Americans were dead, and the entire country was up in arms, ready to go to war against an entire people. And from the next day, at schools across the nation, anyone that looked like the enemy became the target for racial discrimination. People were afraid that America had been infiltrated by spies, by terrorists, and anyone that looked like the enemy was a viable target for revenge, for violence. Fear drove politics, and over the next few months, the federal government would start disappearing key leaders within the minority community. In fact, February of the next year, the President of the United States signed Executive Order 9066. And it was with this executive order that 120,000 Japanese Americans were uprooted from their homes, businesses, and lands and sent to concentration camps that were built on American soil. The vast majority of Japanese Americans sent to these camps were American-born citizens. It was February 19th of 1942 that the executive order was signed, and just 2 weeks later, 120,000 Japanese Americans' lives were changed forever.
Hey guys, so I'm still here editing the video. And if you're still here, some of you might be wondering why exactly you're watching this again. I think we've all had that history teacher that tells us that we need to study history so that we don't repeat it. There was just something in my gut right now that was telling me that we're getting close to repeating this kind of history. And if there ever was a time to share this story, it definitely is now. If there ever was a group that I needed to share this story with, I felt like it was the Muslim world, especially those of us living in Muslim minority countries. So inshallah, I hope it benefits you guys. But more than anything, I'd just be really curious to hear you guys' take. So before you leave the video today, I would love to hear your feedback and let me know what you thought in the comments. All right, back to the video.
Now, this generation of Japanese Americans were very unique individuals. And they're individuals that I've tried to model myself after. People that were equal parts American as they were Japanese. Their Japaneseness made them stoic, strong, brave, loyal, self-sacrificing. Their American parts made them innovative, made them love and believe in the ideal of freedom for all. Their American nature balanced out their Japanese nature and made them unapologetically optimistic that tomorrow was going to be better. This American optimism, coupled with a Japanese concept called gaman, which is a word that means to endure, to stoically and silently bear an unbearable load. Gaman. It was a Japanese mindset that believed that screaming, protesting, and making a big deal out of things was shameful. And so, with almost zero resistance or protest, in just 2 weeks of time, 120,000 Japanese Americans sold their homes, businesses, and farms, sometimes for pennies, and got rid of all of their possessions because they were only allowed a single bag to take with them to the camps. While the concentration camps were still being built throughout America, Japanese Americans were sent to live inside of animal stalls, usually at unused fairgrounds. Entire families were put into unused barns, stables, and pens, and literally lived as animals in the coming months until the concentration camps were completed. Moved en masse via military vehicles and trains, grandmas, grandpas, mothers, fathers, women, children were relocated to camps in the middle of nowhere, the middle of deserts, herded into small makeshift camps that were surrounded by barbed wire and the guns pointing inward. The American government told them that they were there for their own safety, when in fact, they were there because the entire country was terrified. And when fear becomes the motivation for politics, only bad things can happen.
So when I do these videos, I do it like totally without a script. I should probably start using a script, but I think what I just said there gets at the crux of why I wanted to make the video in the first place. When political decisions are made based on fear, that's when problems start happening. And that's why fear politics bother me so much. So I guess just keep that in mind for the rest of the video. And I think that's like the main message I was going for.
And to be honest, that's not even the crazy part of the story. Young Japanese men decided that they would prove their loyalty by fighting for the US Army. The first Japanese Americans that tried to sign up for the war effort were interestingly in Hawaii, ground zero for the Pearl Harbor attacks. When they tried to enlist, they were turned away. They were seen as the enemy, whether they were US citizens or not. After a lot of insistence, they were allowed to work as an engineering corps. And after some time proving their loyalty, the first all-Japanese American battalion was created. The 100th Infantry Battalion was formed in 1942. At the time, it was mostly composed of second-generation Hawaii Japanese Americans. At this point in the history, Hawaii was a territory and still wasn't considered a state. The 100th was shipped off to fight in the European chapter of the war. And at first, with very low trust, they were used mostly as cannon fodder, sent to the front lines. The 100th became known as the Purple Heart Battalion because of the massive amount of casualties that were suffered. Men would often be shot and get their quote-unquote golden ticket home, but insist on going back to the front lines. Most of them would repeat this process, receiving multiple Purple Hearts until they were finally killed on the battlefield. The ranks of the 100th became so depleted that it became necessary to call up reinforcements. Because of the bravery and exemplary service of the 100th, the US government actively tried to recruit more Japanese American men. And while the majority of recruits came from Hawaii, this time, young Japanese men from the concentration camps in America also joined the fight. Unfortunately, at this time in 1943, there was a loyalty questionnaire that was handed out. And there were two questions in particular that had a lot of consequences for the community. Questions 27 and 28, in which they were asked first if they would fight wherever the US government sent them. While many were happy to fight for the government to prove their patriotism, they were unwilling to go back to Japan to fight against their own family. And since the questionnaire didn't ask if they'd be willing to fight in Europe, many people answered no. On question number 2, they were asked if they would be willing to unequivocally renounce all loyalties to the Emperor of Japan.
For most, this question seemed quite ridiculous, as the majority of them had never had any allegiance to Japan or the emperor. They'd been born in the United States. And so simply from a place of confusion, they wrote down no. For others,
in a position where they'd already lost their citizenship in America, many of them feared that they would become a people of no country, no longer able to be American or Japanese. So for various reasons, including some people who simply wanted to protest the US government, many answered no, no, and in later years became known as the no-no boys. Unfortunately, this put a very tough divide within the community between the no-no boys and those who went to go serve on the European front of the war.
As they say, in hindsight, everything is 20/20. And it's so important that I think we learn from this not to get divisive as a community. You know, in the heat of the moment, in the fog of war, it's so hard to tell what a small action like answering a question yes or no on a questionnaire will affect the rest of your life. Unfortunately, there was a division between the no-no boys and the rest of the JA community. Oftentimes, just because of the loss that the families went through of the boys who never came home from Europe, who served with the 100th and the 442, They looked at the no-no boys as cowards, and they were often shamed. However, that's not the case. I can't even imagine the difficulty of being locked up into a camp and losing everything, and then having the government ask you if you're willing to go and serve for them, or to renounce an emperor that you've never even had any allegiance to in your entire life. The ridiculousness of that entire questionnaire. And I don't honestly think that I could say I would have answered yes or no or anything on there. So the point of this is, though, is especially when we have fear politics running rampant in society like they are today, we just have to make sure that we don't start getting divisive. Just stay together. We're not going to get it perfect. And when the dust settles, it doesn't have to be perfect. We have to understand that it's impossible to see 2020 until it's all over. And let's just leave that part up to Allah. Back to the video.
Those who did volunteer formed what became known as the 442, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They took the motto with them, "Go for broke," which in Hawaii was a gambling term. When you had nothing left to lose and you went all in, this was the Hawaii pidgin for going all in on one last bet. The 442 absorbed what was left of the hundreds and went on to become the most highly decorated military unit in the entire history up until present day of the US military. This includes over 1,000 Purple Hearts, over 4,000 Bronze Stars, over 560 Silver Stars, 21 Medals of Honor, 7 Presidential Unit Citations, and were retroactively rewarded a Congressional Gold Medal in 2010. These men took Go for Broke to heart. They had nothing left to lose. And they took everything that made the Japanese and American militaries terrifying and combined them together in the most deadly way imaginable. American innovation and adaptability to quickly changing circumstances allowed them to outmaneuver the enemy in many tight spaces, often without the need of direct leadership above them. Their willingness to sacrifice their own lives for the sake of honor or the sake of their brothers was unparalleled. And even though they were used as cannon fodder and sent to the front lines or on impossible missions, they always came back successful. The Germans were reported to be terrified of them. They became known as Little Iron Men. German soldiers would recount how, with the other American troops, they could hear them marching down the road from over a kilometer away. But when the 442 came, they were silent, and they wouldn't know they were there until they were right next to them. They were American ninjas on a battlefield. And when their backs were against the wall, they would go for broke, literally screaming "Banzai" as they charged enemy positions throughout Italy and France. Can you imagine the confusion on the Nazis' faces? One of their most famous missions was that of saving the 141st. It was a battalion made up of almost entirely Texans. Now at that time, Texas was the heart of America, the heart of American politics. And what was known at the time as the Lost Battalion was what was all over the front of newspapers back home. Over 250 men of the 141st were trapped behind enemy lines, and it was deemed to be impossible to rescue them. So of course, they sent the 442 on a suicide mission to try and retrieve them. The 442 was happy to volunteer themselves, fighting against deeply entrenched positions and machine gun nests in a series of uphill battles. The 442 would go on to rescue the Lost Battalion, saving just over 200 men at the cost of over 800 casualties. The level of self-sacrifice, bravery, and heroism that was demonstrated that day was enough to win over the hearts of Texas. And when soldiers like Daniel K. Inouye or Sparky Matsunaga went back to the US, only to find that even their medals of honor, Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, Silver Stars, and Presidential Unit Citations, they still could not get served at white establishments, rejected for being Japs, for being enemies. And so these men called up Texas. Texas went to bat for them, allowing both Daniel K. Inouye and Sparky Matsunaga to start political careers. Daniel Inouye would be part of the reason that Hawaii was able to gain statehood and would serve in Congress for over 50 years until his death in December of 2012. If you ever visit Hawaii, you'll notice that Hawaii International Airport has been renamed in his honor. Japanese Americans were given their freedom at the end of the war, but had nothing to go home to. Most of them had been forced to give up or sell their land and came out of the camp after 4 years with nothing. But again, This American optimism that somehow tomorrow is going to be better, coupled with the community and family oriented grind mentality of Japan, allowed this community to quickly rise to the top. Much in the same way that Japan experienced an economic miracle across the Pacific, the Japanese American community as well overcame incredible odds and ensured that the next generation was full of college graduates, doctors, lawyers, and new business owners. The community came together, rebuilding and recreating Japan towns across the country and highly community oriented organizations based around Japanese Christian churches and Buddhist temples. The elders never talked about any of this. And when they finally did talk to us, it wasn't with emotion. They didn't get fired up or angry or shed tears. They simply stated the facts, what happened. See, some people think that Japanese people are cold or unfeeling, and that's not true. The Japanese culture is deeply feeling. It's just the aesthetic is one of quiet endurance. The more one is able to control a feeling, the more meaning it has. And being able to do this gaman, to quietly bear the unbearable, there's a certain wisdom. Now, back to the intro of this video. When 9/11 happened, I was a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, which is a type of Japanese Buddhism. I'd never learned much about Islam, and while I knew some cultural Muslims, I didn't know any practicing Muslim. However, the very next day at school, when a Lebanese friend of mine was called a desert, all of the lessons that our elders had been teaching us came flooding back into my head, and I suddenly realized the importance of this sacred history. My community was trying to teach us the mistakes of the past. What happens when fear takes over politics? And now, years later, as a Japanese American Muslim, I find myself often reflecting on my own ancestors' experiences during World War II whenever anti Islamic rhetoric starts to flare up. Every time I see hate speech or Islamophobia anywhere, or experience it myself, the way I conduct myself and the way I react to those type of situations and statements is heavily informed by the history of my people, Japanese Americans. Now, I'm really not on this video to give any lectures about what anyone should do. I just wanted to share my own ancestor stories. 9/11 is not the first event ever that has turned an entire generation against a people. Islamophobia is not the first phobia that has ever existed. And throughout time, people have faced adversity in a variety of different ways. And in each one of these situations, there are different lessons that I think we can learn from the people who've actually been through it before. As Muslims now, here in the present day, we can look back only 2 generations ago to another people that were persecuted simply because they looked like the enemy. And when the government starts pushing propaganda and fear takes over politics and consumes the otherwise rational minds of people, politics quickly becomes very dangerous. I'm not going to try to extract any more lessons from this story. And actually, instead, I'd rather hear your insights. Maybe you found some new connections, some new lessons. And even if you haven't, then maybe you understand just a little bit more where I'm coming from when I start talking about Islamophobia, hate speech, and fear politics. See you guys in the next one. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, finally finished editing that one. I can see now why people are always asking for more support on their channel so that they can keep making more content. So if you guys like that and you want to see more, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment, and hopefully you can encourage me to make another long form video like that, inshallah. All right, see you guys. Assalamu alaikum.